I never imagined a simple camping trip could tear apart everything we'd built over the years. The mountain air was sharp and clean, the stars above silent witnesses to our laughter and the crackling warmth of the campfire. But as the night wore on, the shadows in my heart grew darker. My husband, Ethan, a man I'd been married to for over 30 years, suggested something reckless, something that would turn our lives upside down. As the fire burned down to glowing embers, he casually proposed we swap tents for the night. It sounded like a harmless, playful idea at the time. But that one suggestion would lead me down a path I never thought I'd take, where the line between right and wrong blurred under the cold, indifferent gaze of the stars. Narrator comment, looking back, I can't believe how naive I was. I should have seen the warning signs, but I guess I was too caught up in the moment. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the faint call of an owl in the distance. I stood by the edge of the lake, staring at the stars reflected on the water's surface, their light flickering like distant memories. My name is Claire, and at 53, life with Ethan had become as predictable as the changing seasons. But out here, in the middle of nowhere, I hoped for something different, something that would shake us out of the monotony. Ethan, always the life of the party, had organized this camping trip with his buddies, Ryan and Kyle. I agreed to come, not just for the adventure, but with a quiet hope that the change of scenery might rekindle something between us. The day had been filled with the simple joys of nature, fishing, laughter, and the warmth of the campfire. But as night fell, the stars came out, painting the sky with their cold, distant light. Ethan, true to form, had brought along his favorite whiskey. As the evening dragged on, the bottles grew lighter, his laughter louder, his stories more exaggerated, and his movements clumsier. I remember watching him, his silhouette framed by the fire as he rambled on about our younger days, his words slurring more with every sentence. Ryan and Kyle, equally tipsy, chimed in with their own stories, their laughter echoing through the quiet night. Then, as the fire dwindled to embers, Ethan suggested we all sleep under the stars. It sounded romantic at first, like something out of a movie. But in his drunken state, he took it a step further. He proposed we swap tents for the night, just to mix things up and make the experience more memorable. I hesitated. The idea was equal parts thrilling and unsettling. Narrator comment, I should have said no right then and there. But something about the way he said it, like it was no big deal, made me second-guess myself. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on our faces as we shared stories of past adventures. Ethan, now completely wasted, suggested a toast to old friendships. His laughter was infectious, but his balance wasn't. He stumbled, spilling his drink, and Ryan, always the responsible one, suggested he get some rest. In his drunken haze, Ethan decided he'd sleep in Ryan's tent, claiming it was just like old times. I watched, half amused, as he staggered off with Ryan, leaving me alone with Kyle, who was quietly sipping his drink. The night grew colder, and the idea of sleeping outside lost its appeal. Kyle, noticing my discomfort, offered his tent. No sense in you freezing out here, Claire, he said with a warm smile. I paused, weighing my options. The thought of braving the cold alone was daunting, but the idea of sharing a tent with Kyle felt complicated. Ethan's suggestion to swap tents had already stirred something in me, a mix of excitement and unease. Kyle, I started, my voice barely above a whisper, I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll manage on my own. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. All right, Claire. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me. As Kyle retreated to his tent, I wrapped my jacket tighter around me, feeling the chill seep through my layers. The fire had died down to mere embers, and the silence of the night was almost overwhelming. I could hear the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl, each sound amplifying the solitude around me. I hesitated for a moment, the propriety of sharing a tent with another man, even a friend, weighing on me. But the cold was biting, and Kyle's tent was warm and inviting. I thanked him and settled into my sleeping bag, keeping a respectful distance. As the night deepened, the silence of the mountains enveloped us. I was almost asleep when I felt something hard pressing against my back. My heart raced, fear gripping me. Was it an animal? A rock? But then it hit me, it was Kyle, and he was aroused. My mind flashed back to the last time Ethan and I had been intimate, months ago. The loneliness, the longing for touch, it all came rushing back. Kyle's breath was warm on my neck, and in that moment, I made a choice I never thought I would. I turned to face him, our eyes meeting in the dim light. There was a question in his gaze, a silent plea. I nodded, my heart pounding not just from the cold but from the rush of emotions. "I need this," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of desire and guilt. Kyle's hand reached out, gently touching my cheek. His touch was electric, sending shivers down my spine. I leaned into it, closing my eyes, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine. The tent was small, our bodies close, the air thick with unspoken words. Narrator comment, I knew it was wrong. I knew it went against everything I believed in. But in that moment, I didn't care. I just wanted to feel something real. "I've always admired you, Claire," Kyle murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper. The words hung in the air, a confession that seemed to echo through the silent night. I felt a surge of something forbidden, something thrilling, as our lips met. It was gentle at first, a tentative exploration, but soon the kiss deepened, fueled by pent-up longing and the isolation of the wilderness. I knew this was wrong. I knew it went against everything I stood for. But the need for connection, for warmth, for something real in this cold, starlit night was overwhelming. As we moved, I turned slightly, my heart pounding in my chest. Kyle's eyes met mine, a mix of surprise and desire in them. "Claire," he whispered, his voice a mix of apology and longing. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the same conflict tearing through me. We didn't speak. The weight of silence hung heavily in the air, and I knew that words could shatter the fragile spell we were under, the delicate moment where everything still had the potential to return to the way it had been before. Instead of speaking, I found myself moving closer, drawn inexplicably toward him, feeling the heat of his body seeping through the layers of our sleeping bags. It was both a comfort and a sharp reminder of the closeness we were teetering on the edge of. The air around us thickened, saturated with an electric tension, the kind that tightens your chest and makes your breath catch in your throat, as though the very act of inhaling could give away the unspoken truth between us. His hand, tentative and uncertain at first, found mine. The soft brush of his fingers against my skin felt like a question, an unspoken invitation. But when I didn't pull away, when I allowed my hand to stay in his touch deepened, growing bolder, more confident, like a flame fanned by the wind. I could feel the faint tremors in his fingertips as they traced the lines of my palm, sending shivers up my arm like an electric current. My heart raced, a pulse that seemed to echo deep within me. His breath, warm and steady, brushed against the back of my neck, sending ripples of heat across my skin. His lips were so close, just a breath away, but not quite touching, like we were both afraid to cross a line we knew we might never return from. The weight of the moment pressed down on me like a heavy cloak. This was a crossroads, a place where desire and responsibility collided, and every choice would come with consequences. Narrator comment, I knew what I should do. What society would say was right. But in that dim, flickering light, with the starlit sky as our only witness, the pull towards something forbidden was impossible to resist. It felt magnetic, like the universe itself was pushing us together. And then, as if the decision had already been made for us, his lips brushed against mine, soft, tentative, questioning. It was a kiss that spoke of possibility, of things we both wanted but knew we shouldn't have. A whisper of something we craved but feared. The kiss deepened, and time seemed to slow. The world outside ceased to exist. The boundaries between right and wrong blurred into nothingness. I felt myself slipping, like a ship losing its anchor, drifting into the current of sensation and desire. For a brief moment, I pulled away slightly, the rush of adrenaline making my thoughts race. My heart hammered in my chest. "Kyle, we can't," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the frantic thumping of my own heartbeat. My mind screamed at me to stop, to pull back before it was too late. He didn't say a word, but I saw the understanding in his eyes, the recognition of the conflict between us. Yet, despite that, the longing in his gaze didn't fade. It didn't diminish. "I know," he replied softly, his voice thick with emotion, heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. "But for just this moment, can we pretend?" His words hung in the air, suspended between us, an unspoken plea lingering in the stillness of the tent. It felt like a world unto itself, insulating us from everything beyond its canvas walls. I wanted to say no. I wanted to pull away, to do the right thing, to resist the pull of temptation that was so strong it made my chest ache. I wanted to step back from the edge. But the loneliness, the aching void of needing connection, of feeling seen and wanted, was all too overwhelming. Instead of pushing away, instead of retreating, I found myself leaning in again. Our lips met with a hunger, a fervor that spoke of years of suppressed desire, of moments stolen in the shadows of our lives. His hands moved urgently, desperately, finding their way to my waist, pulling me closer, pressing me into him as though nothing else in the world existed. And in that moment, it was true. The world outside, the responsibilities, the expectations, the consequences, all faded away. There was only the heat, the sensation of his touch, and the overwhelming desire to let go, to lose myself in this one moment. And so, I did. Even as I hesitated, caught in the weight of my thoughts, the decision was made. In the stillness of the night, in the quiet shadow of the tent beneath the distant, uncaring stars, the world outside seemed miles away. I felt a pull, a deep, undeniable need for connection, for the warmth of touch, something I had longed for in silence. Slowly, without words, I gave in to the moment, to the urgent craving for closeness, for intimacy. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to bring us together in this fleeting, forbidden space. Kyle's hands, soft and tentative at first, brushed against my skin with a hesitant gentleness. Each touch seemed to echo in the silence, as though he, too, was waiting for the moment to unfold. As I responded, his hands grew more confident, more sure, as if reassuring both of us that this was happening. It felt like a betrayal, a moment of weakness, perhaps even surrender to temptation. But there was something deeper in it, something I couldn't immediately grasp. Maybe it was strength, the kind born of acknowledging a truth that had been buried within me for so long. The lines between right and wrong blurred, and I found myself unable to choose between them. As we moved together, the world outside the tent vanished entirely. There was no mountain air, no coldness of the night, no sound other than the rhythm of our breath and the quiet rustle of fabric. It was just us, entwined in this secret moment, held together by a shared warmth and the thrill of something forbidden, something we both knew we shouldn't be doing. The pleasure of it was intense, yet laced with the underlying knowledge that this was a line I had crossed, and I couldn't go back. Afterward, as we lay together, the warm glow of our bodies slowly began to fade, and with it, the illusion of the moment. The harsh reality of what had just happened began to seep into my consciousness, creeping through the cracks like the cold mountain air that seemed to penetrate the fabric of the tent, chilling the warmth that had surrounded us. I felt an unsettling mixture of emotions stir within me, guilt gnawed at my insides, and yet, there was a lingering satisfaction, an odd sense of release, as if this moment had unlocked something deep within me that had been tightly held in check for too long. At the same time, confusion washed over me as I tried to reconcile the actions of the night with the person I thought I was. But there was something else, too, an unexpected sense of freedom, of liberation, as though I had, in some way, freed myself from the suffocating routine that had defined my life. Kyle's breathing beside me was steady, almost rhythmic, the sound oddly soothing. I found comfort in his presence, though it felt like a sharp contrast to the stark reality of what I had just done. The quiet stillness between us was heavy, and I couldn't help but think of Ethan, the man I had promised myself to, the man I had betrayed. His face, his love, the future we were supposed to share. How could I face him now? How could I look into his eyes and pretend that nothing had changed when everything inside me felt altered, irrevocably? I turned my head slowly to look at Kyle. His features were softened in sleep, his expression peaceful, unaware of the turmoil that churned within me. In that moment, I wondered about the morning, about how we would face each other when the sun rose. What would we say? Could we ever pretend this hadn't happened? Could we pretend we hadn't shared this intimacy that had shaken me to my core? And what about Ethan? What would he see when he looked at me? Could I ever face him with honesty again, knowing the truth would weigh heavily on my soul? The night had changed me. I felt it deep in my bones, in the quiet hum of my thoughts, in the very way my body now seemed to ache with the unfamiliar, the forbidden. When dawn broke, I knew that I would no longer be the same Claire who had entered this tent, unaware, certain of her path, and untouched by the complexities that had just unfolded. The brief intimacy with Kyle, though fleeting, had ignited something inside me, a longing for more than just the predictable rhythm of my life with Ethan. It was as though, for the first time in ages, I could taste something outside the confines of my daily existence, a desire for freedom, for change, for something more than the role I had been playing. As I lay there, tangled in a mess of emotions, the weight of my actions pressed down on me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Would Ethan notice the change in me? Could he sense it in the way I spoke, the way I looked at him? Would he ever forgive me if he discovered the truth? And what about Kyle? What would our relationship be like after this night? Could we ever be in the same room without the memory of what had happened lingering between us like a shadow we couldn't escape? I didn't have answers, only questions and the crushing uncertainty of what the future would hold. Narrator comment, I couldn't help but think back to the years I'd spent with Ethan. The comfort of our shared routines, the predictability that had once been a source of security. I used to believe love was predictable, that it was supposed to grow stronger, more enduring with time. But as the years went on, the vibrant passion that had once filled our days gradually dulled, like the fading of a bright, welcoming light. The love we shared had become a quiet hum in the background, a steady presence that no longer thrilled or excited me. It was stable, but it lacked the spark, the intensity it once had. This night, this moment with Kyle, was the complete opposite of that. It felt alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. There was nothing gentle or calm about it. It was raw, unrestrained, a whirlwind of emotion and desire that I knew had crossed boundaries I hadn't even realized I still had. It was a passionate, almost desperate experience, and in its selfishness, I found something that had been missing from my life for far too long. There was a reckless abandon in that moment, a surrender to the unknown. And as I lay there, I couldn't deny how it made me feel, awake in a way I hadn't been for ages. As the night unfolded, the stars above seemed like distant, indifferent observers of what had just transpired below. Their silent presence, so constant and uncaring, was a stark reminder that life, with all its messiness and complexity, continued regardless of our choices. I realized in that moment of clarity that this night had shifted something fundamental within me. It had opened a door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through, and I would have to face the consequences. The weight of what had happened hung heavy in the air as I knew I would soon be confronted with an impossible choice. What now? Should I confess everything to Ethan, face the anger, the heartbreak, and the overwhelming guilt that would come with that truth? Or should I keep this secret to myself, letting it fester, knowing it would gnaw at me from within? And what about Kyle? What would happen to us now? What did this night mean for the future? Morning arrived too soon, the first light of day creeping through the fabric of the tent, casting a harsh and unforgiving glow on the reality of what had happened. The warmth and passion of the night before now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the cool clarity of daylight. Kyle was already up, sitting with his back to me, as though lost in his own thoughts, or perhaps consumed by his own doubts and regrets. His stillness made the space between us feel heavy, vast, as if nothing could bridge the gap of what had just occurred. I dressed quickly, my mind spinning in a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, confusion, fear, and, strangely, a sense of liberation. There was a part of me that had been awakened, and though I knew the road ahead would be complicated and painful, there was also a deep, undeniable sense of freedom in facing it. When I stepped out of the tent, Ethan was already up, looking a bit worse for wear from a restless night but cheerful, smiling in his usual optimistic way. He was completely unaware of the storm that had raged within the confines of the tent just hours before. As we packed up our things, I couldn't bring myself to look Kyle in the eye. There was so much unspoken between us, so many questions that neither of us seemed ready to address. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable, but necessary. The drive back to reality was quiet. Ethan filled the silence with talk of future plans, his excitement about the trip we might take next. But all I could hear was the deafening silence of the past night's choices. I caught a glimpse of Kyle in the rearview mirror, his face unreadable, a mask of calm that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was distant, closed off, but there was something in the way he held himself, an uncertainty, perhaps, or a recognition that things had irrevocably changed between us. The miles stretched on endlessly, each one taking us further from the night and closer to a future I wasn't sure how to navigate. Ethan, ever the optimist, babbled on about the beauty of the stars, the thrill of the adventure, not realizing that for me, the night had transformed everything in a way I wasn't prepared for. Breaking the tension, Ethan's voice cut through my thoughts, casual and innocent. "So, Claire, what did you think of the trip? Did you enjoy the stars?" His words, so light, seemed to hang in the air like an awkward reminder of the stark contrast between his world and mine. How could I possibly answer that question truthfully? I forced a smile, trying to mask the turmoil within me, my voice steady though my heart pounded furiously in my chest. "It was enlightening," I replied, the words leaving my mouth like ash, bitter and unyielding. The moment they were out, I regretted them, as if they could never truly convey the storm that raged behind my calm exterior. The landscape outside the car window blurred into a patchwork of green and gray as we drove, each mile pulling us farther from the mountain yet not from the haunting memory of what had unfolded there. The road seemed endless, stretching into the horizon, but no distance could erase the vivid images or the weight of that night. I felt Kyle's gaze on me now and then, not overt but there, silent, knowing, as if we shared a secret we couldn't put into words. That shared understanding bound us together in a way that was both unsettling and undeniable, like an invisible thread that tugged at the core of everything. When we arrived back home, the routine of unpacking felt surreal, almost foreign in its normalcy. Ethan moved around the living room as though nothing had changed, his actions a perfect reflection of his ignorance of the storm that was quietly raging inside me. He seemed so unaffected, so absorbed in his own little world. As I watched him, every simple task he undertook, the way he placed his shoes neatly in the corner, the way he tugged at the straps of his bag, was suddenly imbued with a sense of betrayal. It felt as though I were seeing him for the first time, as though every motion of his was a reminder of how far we had drifted from the truth. That evening, as Ethan prepared dinner in the kitchen, his back to me as he hummed a familiar tune, I sat at the table, my fingers tapping absently against the wood. The rhythmic sound did little to calm the chaos inside my head. My thoughts were frantic, tangled in a web of guilt, confusion, and fear. The decision that loomed over me felt like a dark cloud, pressing down on my chest, suffocating me with its weight. I knew I couldn't keep this secret forever, but the fear of what it might do to everything we had built, everything I had built, made my next words feel impossible. "Ethan," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, barely steady enough to carry the weight of what I was about to say. "There's something I need to tell you about last night." He turned, a spatula still in his hand, the warmth of the kitchen lights casting shadows across his face. His expression, so carefree just moments before, shifted instantly to one of concern, the lines of his forehead creasing as he set the spatula down and looked at me. "What's wrong, Claire?" His voice was laced with genuine worry, the kind of concern that only made me feel more like an intruder in my own life. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the words felt too heavy, like stones lodged in my throat. They had been pressing against my chest all day, suffocating me, and now, finally, they began to spill out. "When you suggested swapping tents, something happened with Kyle. It was unexpected." The room seemed to freeze as his face fell, his eyes darkening, the weight of my words sinking in like a stone dropped into still water. The air between us thickened, and I knew there was no going back now. Narrator comment: thank you for watching until the end. If you haven't subscribed yet, I invite you to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you so much.